Hey Wid fam, this is Leo with One Happy Widow. If you're just new to my channel, thank you so much for joining and for stopping by to watch the video. I hope you enjoy it and find it helpful to you. If so, feel free to subscribe to the channel and click that button down below so that you don't miss any future videos that get released. If you are already subscribed and you've seen many videos, then thank you so much for staying and for coming back and watching more. Um, so today I'm going to talk about guilt. And so if you are widowed or know someone who is, you probably know that there is a lot of guilt that's involved in our grief process. And so it seems to me that every time I have gone through a transition, I guess you could say, into a different stage or phase of my grief journey, that I've always had some guilt mixed in with the other feelings that I'm having. So guilt seems to be something that just kind of recurs and comes back, and it's always mixed in with that process because as we're moving forward, we're also leaving parts of our spouse behind. And so there's guilt involved in that. So I'm going to talk about some of the most common times that I have felt the most guilt in my grief journey moving forward. If you don't already know, my husband of 17 years got cancer, and back in 2017, he was diagnosed, and by the time they caught it, it was stage 4, and he lived 4 months. So he was diagnosed in February of 2017 on Valentine's Day, and he passed away the day before Father's Day in June, on June 17th. And so since then, I've been trying to find a way to pivot from grief to growth. That's why I call myself and my channel One Happy Widow, because I don't want to be defined by my grief. I don't want to be defined by the, although being a widow does affect, seems to be, every part of my life, and has ever since the moment that we found out that he was terminal. And at that moment, I had to start dealing with figuring out how am I going to live without my husband, and how to move forward with that. We have 4 children. At the time, they were living at home with me, all of them, and actually 3 of them were. The oldest one came back. She was 19 in college. She came back and moved back in with us to help me with the kids while I helped him with his treatment and things like that. So at the time when I first became widowed, I was a solo mother of 4 at home, and in that time, the oldest one moved out, and then the next one moved out and back in and out and back in and out and back in. I call them boomerang kids because they seem to not, they don't ever make that switch, in one direction. And so, but she's now, my oldest one is now 25, has a child, my grandson, who is 4. She, and all 3 of my oldest children are living together, just not in my house. My 21-year-old is also living with her siblings and her husband. She is recently married. My 18-year-old son moved out a few months ago, right before the summer, and is also living with his sisters. And so they're doing their thing. So I have 1 child left at home. She's 13. She just started 8th grade. And so she's got a few more years home with the parents. And, so we're going to go from there. All right, so let's talk about the grief. I've had a lot of just moments, I guess, where I have had a lot of grief on me. And so I kind of wrote down some of the most common times that I felt the most grief in this, the most guilt in this grief journey. And I want to share those with you and see if you can relate to any of those. If you relate to anything in this video, make sure that you post in the comment section below and just let me know if there's something I haven't mentioned, something you feel guilty of or had guilty feelings in some phase that I did not mention and I left something out, or something you've experienced that I haven't, then also feel free to post in the comment section down below and just let me know. So first of all, there's survivor's guilt. And of course, I'm sure we've all heard of this term before, even if it's not in a widowed situation. Survivor's guilt is just that feeling of guilt that you feel when someone that you know, someone that's close to you, someone in your family has passed away, and they died and you didn't. And so usually when we talk about survivor's guilt, it's like if you're in a car crash or a plane crash or something like that, and the person with you passed away and you didn't, because it was something that happened really, really close to you, and it was something that you came maybe this close to dying with them, and for whatever reason they died and you didn't. But survivor's guilt can also take place in our marriage, in our widowed journey, because in the case of my husband and I, my husband got cancer and he died, and the guilt of knowing that, why did he get sick and I didn't? Was it some kind of health issue? Was it something he didn't do right? I know now, looking back, that it wasn't any of those things, that he was in the military and he was exposed to a lot of toxins. And I'm in my heart, I know that the exposure to those toxins and to the fuel lines in Afghanistan when he went to war, being around that, I'm almost positive is what caused his cancer. He was 42 years old, otherwise was in good health, didn't smoke, didn't really drink hardly ever, and for a man like that to get a very, very rare type of cancer, it was bile duct cancer, which I'd never even heard of until he got it. Very aggressive, all the way terminal. So, but so I know now when I look back that was the major factor of the reason why. But who are you going to ask to answer the question of why him and not me? Why does he have to miss all the milestones of our children growing up and not be able to finish raising his kids and not be able to see all the milestones, and he's missing all the things? And why do I deserve to get to see all those things and experience all those things, whereas he didn't, because he certainly deserved it? And so it's hard for me to reconcile why I was the one that gets to live and he was the one that had to die. So nobody's going to answer that question. You can ask God, you can ask the universe, you could ask the ether, you could ask yourself. Nobody's going to have an answer for you. And so that's really a tough place to be, because you can ask the question, but you're never going to get an answer for that. So, and a lot of times people feel like when they become widowed, that they have a lot of guilt over the manner of their late spouse's death. So in our case, my husband had cancer. There wasn't really anything that we could see that he could have done to prevent it. There's some times where he probably ate things that he shouldn't have eaten, and he had diabetes, and I don't know if that contributed to any of the things, but he just lived like regular people. And so I don't think there was a whole lot that I could have done to change the reason why he got the cancer and how long that it took before it finally took his life. And all I could do at that time was, I couldn't change anything. I couldn't stop it from happening. I couldn't keep him from dying. All I could do was try to help him manage his pain, and try to make sure that he had the opportunity to say all the things that he wanted to say, and to see his kids and do as much as a family together as we could before his time was up. And so I didn't experience a lot of that guilt of what could I have done more to try to help him, although there was some guilty feelings of how, if you watch my story about the story of his cancer journey, it's a two-parter. It's kind of older, but it talks about the things that happened and maybe some of the decisions that I made while he was sick and when he had been diagnosed and for his treatments. And hindsight's 2020, and I can't go back and live in that world and feel guilty all the time about some of the decisions that I made and the things that I did. But plenty of viewers have come on and made comments about, I can't believe you did XYZ, and I can't believe you didn't do A, B, C, and things like that. So they take care of those guilty feelings for me, even if I don't have them myself. And I've had to really just kind of let all of that go and realize that there's not anything that I could have done that was going to change the outcome. But depending on the manner of death of your spouse, some people do carry a lot of guilt. If it was an accident or it was maybe something that happened very quickly and unexpectedly, then there might be some guilt about a lot of times people think, what if there was just one thing different that day? What if I had just kept them a little bit longer and they in traffic and they had not been in that accident? What if there was one thing different that I could have said or did, or that would have changed the outcome? Or if you don't feel like you could have changed the outcome, maybe you feel guilty about the last thing that you said to them before they left the house, and that was the last time you're going to see them. Maybe you feel guilty that you didn't say something that you should have said to them before they left the house or before the accident happened and things like that. They always say if you're fighting with your spouse, be careful, because what if you're in an argument and that person leaves and then that's the last time you see them? Do you want that last thing you said to them be the last thing that you said to them? And so for some people, that could hold a lot of guilt for them, and it's totally normal. We are humans. There's no way that we can know what's going to happen down the road. And people fight and people argue and people say things and people don't say things. And if you're holding on to guilt like that, just know that it's hard to just let that go and just say, don't let it bother you, because you can't help it if something bothers you. But just also know that as far as coming from our community, as far as coming from me, as far as coming from the people in our Facebook group, we're all widows and widowers. No one is going to support the guilty feelings that you might have for doing something differently before they died, because we all understand how it is to come about that might happen. People who guilt you for that almost always are not widows themselves or widowers themselves. They have no idea, how being a widow works and how going through the passing of our spouse can affect us. And it's real easy to judge somebody when you haven't walked one step in their shoes, much less a mile. And so I think a lot of the guilt could come from wondering how people view us, wondering what they think about the decisions that we made or the actions that we did or the actions we didn't do or the things we didn't say. And so as part of our journey, as part of our grief journey, from pivoting from grief to growth, that's something that we have got to get a control over, and to learn that we cannot live the rest of our lives worried about what other people think. We also can't live the rest of our lives living in the past about what we could have done, should have done, maybe didn't do, wondering the what ifs, because that will really stunt your grief journey. And so that's another place where guilt can come into play a lot. Something that I had a lot of guilt over was the guilt that I felt for my children. The fact that they didn't have a dad anymore living, that they lost their dad and they were so young. The youngest one had just turned 7 when her dad died. The next one had just turned 15 a month before he died. And so, my main man, Stormy, she's trying to call me. My sister's calling through. Anyway, my next daughter had just turned 15 and got her learner's license when he was in hospice. Like that's how soon it was from her getting her learner's license to he was only in hospice for like 11 days, I think. And I'm going in the wrong order. My son at the time was 12, and my oldest daughter, like I said, was 19. And so I had a lot of guilt over just feeling so bad that life had already dealt them such a tough blow. Like here I have 4 children that none of them deserve to go through the pain of losing their dad at such a young age, and then knowing that he's not going to see. He got to see the oldest one graduate from high school. She had already graduated, and that's pretty much the biggest milestone that he got to see. He didn't get to see any of the other ones graduate from high school. He did not see our oldest daughter get married. He did not see his first grandchild be born. He won't see any of the future ones. He did not see Braylon getting married this past year. And so, obviously anything that happens from here on out, he's not going to see. And so I just felt so bad for my kids, because I still have my parents. Both of my parents are still alive, and I don't even get along with my dad. And so, I have this strained relationship. I have zero relationship really with my dad, but he's still alive. But yet my kids had a really great dad. They had a dad that he would say things like, I was put on this earth to be a dad. Like that was his main role in life, and he took it very seriously. He was an awesome dad. And I just felt so guilty that they didn't get to have him, but just for a short amount of time. And as a result of the guilt that I felt, I would think things like, well, life has already dealt them such a hard blow. I would feel guilty for punishing them or giving them consequences for bad behaviors. And so for a couple of years after he died, I wasn't ever the strict disciplinarian anyway. When their dad was alive, he was the one that laid down the law. He was a drill sergeant in the Army. And so I was always the one that kind of like, I was the mama hen. So it was really hard for me to be the strict disciplinarian when I wasn't. And in addition to that, when I needed to be, I felt guilty for doing it because I thought, how am I going to punish this kid for messing up when they probably messed up because they didn't have any guidance from their dad, and they probably messed up because they're having a lot of grief and they're feeling really bad. And so for me to come in and like take their video games away or take the keys to the car away or take their phone away, I would feel guilty for that because I think, hasn't life punished them enough? And here I am being the mean mom, and punishing them even more. But note to you, if you're freshly widowed and you have young children at home, don't make that mistake. I'm having to do that now with the youngest one. I'm having to, really remember that I have the right to parent her, and it is my job to parent her, and that she's going to be mad at me sometimes. And she has been dealt a really, really bad blow from not having her dad, but I'm not making her life any better by letting her get away with things that she shouldn't get away with. And so for my youngest one right now, I'm trying to put those boundaries there for her so she knows, what she's allowed to do and what she's not allowed to do, and really to be not strict, I guess you could say, but just consistent, be very consistent when she falls outside of those boundaries, and let her know what the consequences are going to be, let her know what the rewards are going to be, and when she steps outside of those boundaries, to be very swift, be very consistent on putting those in place. Where I didn't do that when the middle two were still at home being teenagers. And so as a result, they became very entitled, and they kind of ran all over me during that tumultuous teenage time, and it was just rough on all of us. It was just really rough on all of us. And so the guilt of me feeling guilty about them losing their dad caused me to be an ineffective parent during that time. In addition to, I was dealing with the grief myself, but it just affected my parenting abilities. And looking back, I know that was not the right choice to make, but in the moment, you're doing the best you can based on the information you have in front of you. And so all I can do is look back, learn from those mistakes, and try not to make those with my youngest daughter, and just do the best I can to give her structure, to give her boundaries, and to make sure that she knows that she's safe and she's loved. And that even though her dad died, she's still got to learn how to live with grief. She's got to learn how to succeed in life. She's got to learn that she's got rules that she's got to follow just like everybody else. She doesn't get a pass because her dad died. She still has to do what she's supposed to do. She's still going to get consequences for making bad choices. And so she's got a consequence right now. I don't want to go into details, but she got in trouble for making a bad choice at school, and she lost her phone for a month. And so she's not too happy with mom right now, but that's the way it goes. All right. So the next situation, that you might feel guilt over as being a widow, is guilt over financial gain. So sometimes, some of us were fortunate enough to be able to be financially taken care of when our spouse died. Many of us are not. And that doesn't seem to be across any kind of general lines. It's just for some of us, we had a life insurance or an insurance policy, or we had assets, or we had a pension or something like that we were able to tap into, or that we were able to cash in on. And then other times, especially for young widows and widowers, is that many times young widows are left with not very many assets, because when a 20-something-year-old guy is married and has some kids, most of the time, he's not really thinking about how my family is going to be taken care of when I die. Because when you're in your 20s, you're not thinking about dying, you're thinking about living. And so a lot of times those aren't in place. And that's the time. And trust me, if you're watching right now, if you know anybody who's young and married, that's the time when they're going to need it the most. A young widow with some young kids at home who maybe doesn't work, she needs that life insurance more than any other. Okay, because she now has to finish raising those kids and figure out how to pay all the bills, and maybe she's not even working right now. And so just know that that's just something you need to take care of if you have a family and you're thinking about that kind of thing. Speaking of financial gain, if you are widowed and you are not sure how you want to figure out your new finances, maybe you have a life insurance policy, maybe you're not really sure what you have available to you for pensions and money, maybe you don't know when you should try to start drawing on Social Security or not, you're not really sure how to do a budget or if you should invest the money or if you should live on it. And so those are questions I cannot answer for you at all because I am terrible at finance. But I do have a good resource that is free for you to go. It's called Money Pickle. I have a link for you. It's moneypickle.com/onehappywidow. Make sure that the O, the H, and the W are capitalized. It's case sensitive because otherwise the link won't be valid. But I will put the link in the description below as well. If you go there, they will give you a free online 45-minute consultation on, you can take all of your information, whatever you want to share with them about finances. They will tell you what your options are. They will answer your questions. They will let you know where to go from here. And at that point, if they have other services that they can provide for you, then they will let you know what those services might be and how they can help you further. So that is just a gift to you. So check out Money Pickle and let me know if it was a helpful thing for you. But I was fortunate enough that my husband had a life insurance policy for us. And so I was able to have some money that I was able to provide us with a place to live and take care of us that way. That was his way of financially taking care of us. It was not enough for me to be able to retire and stay at home with them for the rest of their childhood. I never stopped working. I worked full time. I worked part time for 1 year and I just could not afford to make it ends meet. And so I went back to full time. I'm still working full time. And if you've watched my videos at all, you know that I work a lot more than full time. This past year, I probably worked like 60 hours a week on average. And so, but the point is, if it wasn't for that life insurance policy, I don't know how I could have made it, to be honest, with having so many years to still raise our kids. I'm a teacher, so teacher salaries suck. They're not that great. And so just living on just the teacher salary would have been rough to do and pay rent and have car payments and all those things. So luckily I had enough to where I could set us up with a place to live and then I could just go to work and keep the bills paid during that time. But I will tell you that cashing in that check, I had an enormous amount of guilt. As a matter of fact, I did a video that I talked about it one time and in my mind I kept calling it blood money. I felt like it was blood money. Like I had the check in my hand. I'm standing at the bank and I'm like, this is a large amount of money. And so I'm thinking, do I just go to the teller and just like hand her this check and say, hey, can you deposit this into my account? Or I'm sitting here the whole time shaking my hand with the check. I'm like, what if I drop it? What if it rips? What if something happens? Like, your mind goes in weird ways. But so I went and asked if I could talk to somebody like in a private office. And when I handed the check over, they were like, oh, how nice for you. And I'm like, they didn't even ask me, like what happened. And so I just broke down, I was like, yeah, the only reason why I have this check is because my husband died. And here I am at the bank, cashing this money. And it's helping me financially. And I felt so guilty over the fact that, I wasn't sitting there saying, thank God he died so I could get this check. I certainly wasn't thinking that. Nobody ever thinks that. And, I'm just sitting there thinking that I would give up this check and I would give it back in a heartbeat, if I could have my husband back. But that wasn't the case. And so I'm sitting here cashing this check and I'm financially benefiting over the fact that he died. And so there was a tremendous amount of guilt with that, because there's no way I could have, had that financial stability if it hadn't been for him dying. And so that was a really hard situation to reconcile. And then there's a couple of other things. Well, as we move forward in our journey, our grief journey, at some point, we got to get out of our funk and get out of that fresh grief, and we got to learn how to live with the loss. Like, we have to learn how to live the rest of our life and incorporate the fact that we're widowed into the rest of our lives. And so at some point, we start figuring out, like, we got to feel happy again. And so a lot of times, the first time that you feel happiness, or the first time that you laugh at a joke, or the first time that you smile, or the first time you watch something funny on TV and you forget for just a second that they died. Like, I don't remember what I was watching, but I just remember, like, there was a period of time where I think I watched a TV show or something, and I realized that during the whole TV show, I hadn't thought about him one time. I just watched the show. It was funny and I laughed, and it was just like it was just like I was sitting there by myself watching TV, but I forgot, that he was dead. And it was pretty fresh in the grief. And so as soon as I thought about it, I was like, well, how dare you? It was the first time that I had gone for a period of time without just having it in the front of my mind. And I felt a lot of guilt, because I felt like, oh my gosh, you forgot about him already. What would he think? What would other people think? And, it was that first time of feeling that moment of where I wasn't thinking about it constantly. And I actually, like, enjoyed a 30-minute TV show. And I had a lot of guilt for that, because I felt like I was, like, leaving him behind, like I was forgetting him. It's not really what was happening, but I had that feeling. And I forgot to mention this. I got to go back, and I've said this in many of my videos, but I skipped over this. The very first moment that I found out that he died, like, I knew he was close to death. He was in hospice. We were just kind of like waiting around, and we knew it was going to be within the next few days or hours or whatever. And I remember the first thing that I felt when they told me that he was gone was relief. And it was not relief for myself. It wasn't relief because he was gone. It was just that he had been in so much pain. He had been so sick. And I know there's people that have lived with cancer for years and years, and he only had it for 4 months that we knew of. So he only suffered from that. It's almost like when he got the diagnosis, he started having symptoms right away, and then he went to chemo and all the things that come with it. But managing his pain was just really, really hard. Staying on top of the pain and finding the right dosage of pain medicine that would keep him comfortable. Seems like it was just we were chasing it all the time, because as soon as he'd get a dosage that's like, oh, I feel better, by the next day it seemed like that dose wasn't working anymore. And so and since it was a cancer that was like in his, it went to his liver and his lymph nodes, and it just, spread all over, but it was like in his internal organs. And so he just hurt all the time. I couldn't hardly ever hug him. I could hold his hand and I could touch his face, but I couldn't put my arms all the way around him and hug him because it would hurt him. And so, and all he would complain about is, I hurt. Please tell him, I need more medicine. I'm hurting. And then he took medicine, and this might be TMI, but when you take a lot of pain medicine, you can't poop. So it makes you constipated. And so he would go back and forth between, I can't go to the bathroom, and I'm hurting, and I can't go to the bathroom. And, it's just like we had months of that. And so my first feeling was relief that he's finally out of pain. Finally. It's the first time, as soon as they said he was gone, my first thought was, thank God he's not hurting anymore. He's out of pain, finally. And then right after that, I just felt so guilty for feeling that relief. I have this other voice in my head that says, how dare you? How dare you feel relief? Your husband just died. And so how dare you feel any kind of, feeling besides agony and sadness and grief. But, the relief, like I said, wasn't for myself. It was for him. And unfortunately, the only way in his situation for him to not feel pain anymore was for him to leave his body and go to be with Jesus in heaven. And so that was my relief. And then right after that, like I said, guilt just piled on top of that right away. And so that was my first that was my first experience, I guess, with grief and guilt. So anyway, fast forward back to when you first start feeling happy, when you first start cracking a smile, when you first start feeling like maybe you want to go out and do something. Maybe you want to go to the movies. Maybe you want to go enjoy a hobby that you used to do that you weren't doing anymore. So as soon as you start feeling like you want to go move forward in your grief journey, and try to find some happiness, or try to allow yourself to be happy, or try to make yourself happy, or try to do something that makes you happy. Anything that has the word happy. Almost always when you first start doing that, it's going to come with a side item of guilt. It's always kind of mixed in there. And every time after that we go through a new phase or a new stage of grief, it seems like there's always guilt mixed in with that. And so then we have to reconcile talking ourselves out of, there's no reason for you to feel guilty. This is okay. This is normal. This is what we're supposed to do. It's what we're meant to do. When our husband dies, we are not meant to be miserable every second for the rest of our lives. Okay, that's not the way it's supposed to go. You might think that's how you're going to feel for the rest of your life. In fresh grief, you might kind of want to feel that way, because that's almost the way of showing how much you loved them and how much you miss them. And so you feel like, you feel guilty, because that kind of goes into my next point, that you feel guilty for moving forward. And another reason is because the more you move forward, the farther is the space between the amount of time since you're with them. I actually made a video called something like walking backwards while moving forwards, or something like that. I'll see if I can find, I'll put the link to it in the description below. But it's about how it's so hard, because we feel like we're being pulled in a tug of war as we move forward into our new life and our new normal, which I hate that term, but it is the most accurate term, new normal. As we move forward, we're distancing ourselves more and more from the memory of our spouse, and from the time that they were with us, and the life that we had with them, as things change. And maybe you move, maybe you get a new job, maybe you move to a different place, maybe your life changes and you do some things. And the more things that you do, and the more you start living for yourself, that opens the door for some guilt, for you to feel some guilt about you're doing these things, and that you're not doing with him. Sometimes I feel guilty that I get to do the things, I get to see the kids, I get to continue to live, I get days that he doesn't have. He would have done anything to get some more time on this earth, and he doesn't have it. And so for that reason, I have to live for us both, because I have to live the life that he didn't get to live. He should have had 30 plus more years on this earth on average. And, he got gypped out of that. And so I have to live those for him and me. And so I have to do right by his memory, and for the kids. And then, so the last thing is, for some of us decide that we do not want to find love again. That was our true love, and our person that we lost that was it for them, and they don't ever want to move forward, and that is totally fine. But some of us choose to move forward in love, and open our heart to the possibility of love again. And that's what happened to me. I met someone who was also widowed, and it was a whirlwind romance, and it happened really quick. And it was 4 years ago, just over 4 years ago, that we met. We met in June, got married in November. So it was pretty quick. So this November will be our 4-year anniversary. And so now we've been together for a while. And but it was hard when we first started seeing each other, to not feel guilty, because at the very beginning you still feel married to your spouse, and so you almost feel like you're cheating, like you went all this time without being faithful to your spouse. And now suddenly, even though you still love your spouse, your late spouse, you have to reconcile your feelings. And believe it or not, it's hard to explain to anybody else how you can do this until you're doing it. Because if you've never done it, how can you explain how you can love your late spouse and love your new boyfriend or love or husband at the same time? You can fall in love and continue to grieve at the same time. It is possible. The best thing I can compare it to, if you can't understand it, is when you have a child and you have one child, and you look at that baby and you think, I'll never love anyone else on this earth, not my spouse, not anybody else, as much as I love that kid. That's like my heart living on the outside of my body, right there. And you get pregnant again, and you can't even imagine, like, you have this baby in your belly and you're like, I cannot imagine living this child as much as I love the baby that I've had for however long. And lo and behold, your next baby comes and you immediately feel that same love. And just because you love that new baby as much as you love the baby you already have, you don't have to love your first baby any less in order to love your second baby anymore. Your heart just grows to allow you to be able to love both babies just as much. So for the same reason, my kids have trouble with this, I think, but for the same reason, I don't have to love Dewey any less in order to love JP anymore. And so it's a hard thing to explain because it doesn't really make a lot of sense logically, but it's just possible. We've both done it. And so, but when I first, started dating, I did feel guilty. And I'm sure a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, you deal with it doesn't matter what you do. If you don't get married or you don't find love again, people are going to be like, wow, she's a spinster or whatever. They're going to have something to say about it. And if you do decide to go date or find a boyfriend or get married, then somebody's going to have something to say about it. Doesn't matter what you do, how you grieve, you're always going to get judged. I got another video about that too. So if you want to watch that, I'm sure you can find it. And as a matter of fact, when I first started dating JP, I had several dreams. I had dreams that Dewey came back and he was like, hey, I'm back. I wasn't really dead. I was just gone. And now I'm back. And where's the house? And where's the kids? And I can't wait. And in the dream, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to tell him that I had this boyfriend? And then we got married and I had a couple of more dreams. And I'm like, how do I tell him that I'm married to someone else? And so I know if I was dreaming it must have been that guilt, that was messing with me, that was dealing with me, my heart, my mind, and trying to just figure out how to reconcile all of that. And I think about, sometimes I think about my husband now, JP. He's widowed, and his wife is buried over here, across town, and he's got an empty plot right next to her for him. And then Dewey is buried in the military cemetery, and I, as his widow, am allowed to be buried in the same plot on top of him, right there in the same plot. So there's a plot over there for me. And so we've had a couple conversations and still haven't come up with a solution, but where are we going to be buried? Are we going to be buried together? Or is he going to be buried with his wife, and I'm going to be buried with his first wife, and I'm going to be buried with Dewey? And so that's a weird decision to try to make. And I think what makes the most sense is that being buried is not for the dead, it's for the living. And so the most logical thing is that he will be buried with his first wife so that his children that he had with her can go and visit both their parents at the same place. My children that I had with Dewey can visit us both at the same place if they go visit. And JP and I, we're old, so we don't have any kids together, just pets. So that's probably what will end up happening. But anyway, so the guilt feelings, of moving forward, that was something that's been, the most recent. And so, as I said, every time you go through a new stage or when you pivot from grief to growth, there's going to be growing pains. And those growing pains, I think, a lot of the times have to do with the guilt that you feel for moving forward in life and feeling like you've left your late spouse behind. And so in a nutshell, that's basically how it all works. So, okay, so that's going to wrap it up for this week. Thank you so much for watching and hanging in there with me, and I will see you next time. Bye.